of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
I'm here.
Good evening, folks. This is Diamond with the Oppenheimer Ranch Project. Apparently, the radio program didn't have the entry bumper, or we missed it, but hopefully you're listening. And I heard, Lee, you're there, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. How's your 4th of July going?
Great. Couldn't be better.
Well, I just got back from buying a mini bike for my electrician at Tractor Supply. So that's pretty excellent.
Yeah, the little 5-horse, the one's got that looks like a fuel tank with the open box on the inside.
Yeah, it's a Coleman 200X.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, there's another one similar to it that I should recommend as well. It's like a Baja bike or something like that. $500. Tractor Supply.
Yeah, it's $500. So
Yep.
Out there in Radio Land, if you're listening to another episode of The Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the grand solar minimum. On air with us tonight for the second part of Ask Lee is Lee Wheelbarger, subject matter expert, military electronic systems. He has a wide-ranging resume, Electric Blue Solar Yacht Project captain and project manager, America's Solar Boat Cup regatta director, and he's worked for the DoD with battlefield electronics since 1985. That's a long time, decades. And now he's here to answer your questions. And Lee, being a subject matter expert, I would say you're the person to answer questions. What would you say?
That's what I did for about 30 years for the government. So you guys just aren't paying for it.
Well, on this Independence Day, we'll jump right into it with our first question from Old Frugal One, Hyperdrive Movement. Now, we're going to be repeating a lot of questions from last week. If you don't mind, we'll go over them again for people listening tonight and people listening again. There'll also be links to our conversation from Lee 2 weeks ago down below this video. This is all a follow-up from last week's discussion on the radio program with Dr. Anita Bailey. Now, she has shared with us an amazing PDF, EMP, CME, and Grand Solar Minimum, preparing for the risks of electrical grid disruptions and the coming Grand Solar Minimum. Lee, did you get a chance to look at that?
Yes, I did. I actually read through it, really enjoyed it, and actually called her on the phone and spoke with her and her husband. Me and my wife did for a couple hours the other night, so we had a great conversation.
Excellent. We really appreciate all the hard work she put into that, so this should be a great follow-up. If anyone has any questions about that or any other questions in general, we'll be answering them tonight. So again, this is Old Frugal One Hyperdrive, and I believe it's a two-part question. We answered it last week. You can tell us if you remember. The question is, I'm an electrician, but I'm not aware of any device that I can wire into my main breaker that can detect CME or EMP. And what I think he means is, last week we discussed putting an old-style fuse before the entire breaker box to blow. And he's saying, and it will safely trip my circuits to protect my house. Are you, Lee, aware of any such device other than the one I just said? If so, where can you get one? And he's not convinced the conventional breaker will trip the incoming surge. And how do I safely protect my backup generator from CME pulse? Whew, long question.
Okay. There is equipment. So you can look up Mill Standard 188-125, which specifies what all the electronics have to do. For the International Telephones Union standard, you can look at standard K78 and K81. Or the IEC standard, you can look up the SC77 C series as well as the 61,000 series of standards, and that will outline all of the equipment that is necessary and available to meet those standards. Additionally,
for the layman, Lee, those standards are to protect against EMP, CME, shockwave,
yes,
so to
sir.
speak?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
All the K1, K2, and E1, E2, and E3 of the different types of waves. And we can get into that later in the program. But you can look up all of those standards because an EMP is actually 3 different waves. So you have the E1, which is the first part of the wave, which the rise time is like 70 picoseconds as far as how fast it comes up, and it only lasts a millisecond. And then you have a gamma ray burst after that, which starts after a millisecond and goes on for about a second, and that or half a second, and that coming off of the burst goes out, and it's such a, you're talking like a megaton or a 400 kiloton type device, up a high altitude burst that will actually, it's so much power being released, it'll actually reverberate the electromagnetic fields of the planet. The magnetosphere will actually reverberate and carry that energy out even farther. So you can see just a 10 kiloton ground burst nuclear warhead being set off can destroy equipment for 40 miles out with these electromagnetic fields that pulse out. And then another part of that is people say, oh, well, when you talk about CMEs, they say that, that's similar to the long wave or the lightning part or the E3 part of an EMP. And they say that, that you don't have to worry about because it's such a long line that you don't have to worry about anything that's, less than 300 feet long. But that's not true because Cat 5 cable under testing as short as 100 feet long will fry the routers or any other sensors that are connected to them because they're operating in the millivolt range, 300 millivolts for line level or below or what have you. But when you're talking about an EMP or a CME or that type of event taking place, with the E1 for the first, which they call the fast wave, which takes place over the first microsecond, the energy induced per meter into a wire is anywhere from 50,000 to 200,000 volts. So when you talk about 50,000 to 200,000 volts per meter being applied to a conductor during that pulse, that's large voltages in a very short distance. And so it only takes a very small amount of electricity to fry electronics. So there is equipment out there that can be used for this. You can look up those standards. There are currently 61 utilities in the United States working on projects to completely protect power generation facilities. One of those sets of facilities is in Louisiana, and the other grid systems that are being upgraded and hardened are in the Carolinas, both North and South Carolina. So at the moment, those 2 grids are the best in the United States as far as protection. And a grid that is turned off prior to a CME can be protected from that CME with the exception of the transformers, and they really can't be protected that well.
Excellent. So if you're listening out there, Google all those, techie abbreviations that Lee just mentioned, and you'll find different regulatory means by which the mainstream is hardening their electronic systems so that you can get the proper information to harden your systems yourself. Now, the second part of his question goes to how does he safely protect his backup generator from CME pulse? And I believe we said you cover it in copper mesh. That would be the best way.
Yeah, copper mesh. You can, if it's disconnected from everything, you can actually they have an EMP blanket. And of all of the EMP blankets, the one I recommend is the thicker blanket that kind of feels like denim. It's green in color. It has stainless steel wires in it, and you want the one that is conductive on both sides. And so all you have to do is if you have a generator or something sitting on the ground, You put a pallet under it so it's not physically touching the ground, and then you put this blanket over top of it and put bricks around it to hold it down on, at least four corners, and that will protect that to 30 to 90 dB, depending upon the blanket and where you are, so on and so forth.
Where you can get these easily on the internet?
You can get them. There's a doctor, I can't remember what his last name is right now. He actually sells them. But you can look up EMP blanket, and you want the dark, what's kind of a drab green colored one. That's stainless steel. There's only one that's drab green with stainless steel mesh. And of all of them tested, I think 11 were tested. 3 were found to be above all of the rest. And of those 3, the green one with the stainless steel conductive on both sides worked the best.
Now, what kind of price point are we talking?
A couple $100 for a blanket.
Okay. Next question. You ready?
Sure.
Dear Lee, in the situation of EMP or other, and no gas is available for cars, what can be substituted, if anything, to get you down the road if your car is still working? And my answer is a horse.
Well, this is Lee's redneck tricks of improvisation of the situation. You get yourself one of the oil changing pans. Everybody's seen them. It's as big as a trash can lid. It's black. It's got a hole in it and a spout off the one side. So you get yourself a long, like an arrow or a rod that's pointed or whatever. You're cruising down the road in your car. Your car's getting low on gas. Well, pick any other car, because this car's sitting around everywhere. Pull up next to the car, stick your pan underneath the fuel tank. Most new fuel tanks are made of plastic. Once you put your oil pan underneath the fuel tank, take your rod, stick it up against the side of the fuel tank, smack it with a hammer, it punches a hole in it, you pull your rod back out, it fills your pan full. When it's full, you go over and you pour it into your car and you go on down the road. That's the trick for gasoline. With diesel fuel, you can run off a variety of other fuels, so you have more opportunity, especially with 4 fuels, especially with the older model diesels prior to 1997.
Yeah, and you can set up a bypass and actually run used fuel oil after the engine is hot on the diesel, as long as you flush it back with diesel. Mm-hmm. And to learn that, it's a whole bunch of YouTubes on that topic. Now, as far as gasoline substitutes, do you know of any?
I don't really know of a gasoline substitute that I would want to try to put into a car, with injectors and so on and so forth. Diesel fuel, we used to do all kinds of crazy stuff. We would pour motor oil into gasoline to make kerosene, and we actually had a chart of stuff that we could mix together to try to get rid of it. Now,
siphoning gas is a bad idea. I've done it when I was a kid, and you get it in your mouth, and it's probably why I'm insane. But as far as the plastic tanks in the newer cars, I'm with you on point there. You can also use a cordless drill because it's a plastic tank with a wood bit, and just to make a slow hole and pull it out, and with that same exact oil pan drain that you're talking about. But siphoning gas, it will be plentiful, and if you're in a resort town or where there's rentals or leftover cars, there's going to be a lot of leftover cars to get gas out of.
And when we're talking about a cordless drill, we're talking about like a brace and bit, not an electric cordless drill, because you don't want the sparks coming off of the commutator and the brushes in that drill underneath that car when you're letting gasoline out of the tank.
No, so that would be a boom if there's vapor.
Yeah, so I would want to use a hand drill. I like the idea. We've done it with a punch, and just punch a hole in the bottom of the car.
With what, like a 1/4-inch steel rod?
Yeah, just steel rod, and you sharpen the end of it. We used to, when we used to do military scenarios, at military bases, we had cities, small cities. One of them is in Fort Benning, Georgia, at the McKenna Mount facility, military operations on urban terrain. And so we teach all kinds of soldiers to do all different types of missions. And some of those, they have to scavenge for, they're in a fighting in a city, and they've got a vehicle, and they've got to scavenge for fuel. So that's one of the techniques we teach, is to punch a hole in the bottom, use a K-bar knife or something else, and You can put it in your helmet. You can put it in all kinds of other things to carry it over and put it back into the Humvee if you get separated. It's part of escape evasion training and operating behind enemy lines and things of that nature.
Excellent. Are you listening out there? All right, next question. Ken Malloy. If we get a warning of an incoming CME, will disconnecting the main circuit breaker alone be enough to protect his refrigerator?
No. And the reason for that is people say, okay, with a CME, you've only got to worry about wires that are longer than 300 feet. You say, oh, yeah, well, I don't have any wires that's any longer than 300 feet. It's, only 150 feet out to my well, and it's 150 feet out to my pole light. Well, guess what? If your well's on one side of your house and your pole light's on the other side of the house, you got 150 feet on one side. It comes into the breaker panel, goes through the breaker panel, goes out to the other side. Ta-da! There's now 300 feet of wire. So to protect everything inside, you need to go through and individually cut off every single breaker. So the first breaker I would pop is the main, and the next one after that would be my well, and then I'd be popping everything else thereafter.
Excellent. Now, I have a question for you at the end if we run out of time, because I want to make a Faraday cage out of a shed I'm building. But let's get on with the listeners. This is Adapted Dave, just 5 hours ago asking this question. What's the watts per square meter output level of the sun we need to watch for to begin our bug-out process, providing there are no other issues prior to this threshold is hit? What do you think is the watts per square meter or the TSI, oh my God, let's get ready moment? Do you have one? And is
no, I do not.
Okay.
Because there is no specific TSI, and then bam, everything changes. Okay, that doesn't work that way. As far as the grand solar minimum itself, it's a progression from one climate to another climate that takes about 30 years total to take place from the highest temperature to the lowest temperature. And it drops quickly through the middle. So it starts slow, accelerates through the middle, and then when it gets down to the bottom, then it levels out, stays at the colder temperature. So, the first 3 to 5 years of it will be dramatic when it starts to come on, and that's what we're actually starting to see now. I mean, that's the snows that we actually have in Colorado today, and the Rockies, and so on and so forth. So, it's here. So there is no, magic number as far as on the TSI of when it's bad. Once we get below 1,360 watts per square meter and start moving below that, it will be extremely evident on the face of the planet that things are changing. And I hope that we never go as low as 1,357. Because if we were to ever go as low as 1,357 watts per square meter, the face of this planet would look much, much different than it does right now. A good majority of it would be white.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, here's the next question. I can't read it. I'm trying to get through it. I cannot conquer the math to find out the trajectory of cosmic rays hitting our area. This is coming from Southeast Queensland, Fiona Rose Monroe. Last summer, I saw quite a few contrails like the ones in the States. Do you think this is the onset of cosmic rays altogether, or an increase that includes this now happening here? I have no idea what this means. Also, I listened to your... Okay. Go.
Okay, so they are seeing, just like everybody else is on the planet, and everyone is seeing it, some more than others. It depends upon what their latitude is on the planet. And you can't predict the trajectory of cosmic rays because cosmic rays traveling at almost the speed of light are influenced by electromagnetic fields or the magnetosphere of the Earth. So a cosmic ray can come over your head and go around behind the tree in the backyard and shoot over past your car and come past your washing machine and go zipping through you and take off another direction. So to know where they came from, nobody knows. Now, we do know that more of these are channeled more towards the polar regions or the higher latitude regions above 35 degrees latitude, on up closer to, almost 90 degrees latitude. That's where we see the aurora borealis. And what you're seeing now is we're at an all-time high of galactic cosmic rays ever recorded. I mean, when I say ever recorded, I'm talking going back, hundreds of thousands of years. And so we will see additional nucleation in our atmosphere. We're seeing it now. And the contrails that you're seeing are a combination of the correct humidity, the correct altitude, barometric pressure, so on and so forth. If those contrails are bigger and fluffier than they normally look like, which people think is, the chemtrails, that is the nucleation from the cosmic rays interacting and enhancing that nucleation to make a bigger, puffier, fluffier contrail. And so, yes, it can augment the contrails, and yes, it does give you that haze that you see in the middle of the day. It's beautiful in the morning, and you get that haze around noon, and that's those cosmic rays coming in, creating that slight nucleation, and that slight nucleation is creating that light haze. That light haze is reflecting a little bit of energy back out into space. You can see it with your naked eye, and we're going to get more cooling from that as it continues to proliferate over the planet and then interact with things like ship tracks and other things that humans are putting off, plus clouds that are already here.
Yeah, in fact, we were noting today, my friend and I outside, he said, hey, do you notice the blue sky here? The bluebird sky is now more like a powder blue, chalky blue, because he's well aware of the cosmic ray increase. And today, the Thule Greenland Neutron Monitor, Bartol Research Institute from the University of Delaware, coming out with all-time new modern maximum cosmic ray levels officially as we speak. This is the graph by R. Pyle coming out July 2018. I shared it all over social media, and it's only up from here at least until 2020.
Yes. And and we've seen this coming. I mean, I've been watching galactic cosmic rays increase, from all kinds of other people monitoring them all over the world. We've been watching this increase go up and up and up. And a couple of years ago, I said, look, if it continues at this rate and all the mass that it's going to, and as we're moving through the spiral arms of the galaxy and so on and so forth, you look at everybody's different papers on it, it looks like we will exceed all-time levels, which is where I had talked about if the sun decreased back to a moderate minimum level, and everything was the same between the moderate minimum level and today, that it would be colder. If the TSI was the same, it would be colder now, because now we have more pollution and aerosols put into the atmosphere from humans, and we have the increased influence on our atmosphere by cosmic rays, which are being much higher than ever before.
Yeah, these are indeed unprecedented times, and the weather and the phenomena we're going to witness moving forward are, there is no historical context. There is no proxy to this. The last time it was like this, maybe 11,500 years ago, anything similar as far as climatic shifts. So that's where we're at based on the science. Second part from Fiona Rosso Monroe from East Queensland. Last time you were on, Lee, we talked about Faraday cage design and housing certain parts of things inside Faraday cages. She wants to know if you have a diagram anywhere that we can link to when we put the video up.
There are all kinds of Faraday cages online as far as diagrams, blueprints, how to build them, so on and so forth. YouTube has them. So, yeah, there's 1,000,001 different designs for simple Faraday cages. It's basically just a box that is insulated from the ground that you can go into. And if you're going to ground anything running into it as far as electrical, it has to be shielded and grounded outside of that box. There can be no common ground from outside to inside that Faraday cage that is not shielded between those 2 points.
Excellent. And I'll look for some of those diagrams, and I will link it below this video when we post it this weekend. So that's a heads up if you're listening. There will be diagrams. I'll find them, and I'll put them up. This is from Clark Hungerford. Question for Lee. With the flux of cosmic rays and the decreased magnetosphere, is there any way that a vortex of supercooled plasma from space could come down and freeze us all in our tracks? Something like the day after tomorrow.
Well, I wouldn't call it like a super cooled vortex of plasma from space.
What would you call it?
Well, what you would have is you would have highly charged particles interacting with our ionosphere and our atmosphere. And in some cases, depending upon the conditions, that interaction produces a gas known as nitric oxide. Not nitrous oxide as in laughing gas. It's nitric oxide in a gas form, like for making nitroglycerin or the nitro tablets that people put underneath their tongue for a heart condition. And what happens is when that gas is generated in the atmosphere, according to several researchers from NASA and several other particle physicists, universities throughout the United States and a couple other countries, they determined, and I think this was released on December 7th, 2017 or 2016 is when NASA released that paper. But anyway, they said it acted like a giant air conditioner in the atmosphere that you could not turn off. And so we have already documented cases of where there have been these polar cold spots of people who have actually filmed it in their cars, of where the super cooled air comes down and the temperature will drop as much as 40 degrees in a matter of like 10 minutes. The most impressive video I've seen, there were two that came out of Canada this past year, and one of them, the gentleman got into his car. He says, "Oh my God, it's getting cold out here," and it was already, minus 4°C, and the guy goes and runs and gets into his car, which has a perfectly clear windshield, and you can see other people moving around outside and cars and stuff going by, and he puts his camera up looking through the windshield, and you can actually see the ice growing across the front of his windshield, and it freezes his entire windshield over in about a minute. So, yes, this is happening. Will this continue to happen? Absolutely. Will it get worse? Absolutely. Will it get to a point of where it comes down and freezes things like a woolly mammoth? I can't say that, but I can say that it will get worse. And depending upon where you are when it takes place and what you're eating and what the weather conditions is, well, yeah, it is possible for a woolly mammoth event, but I won't guarantee it, but it is definitely possible.
Yeah, it's my assumption as a geologist and paleoclimatologist that there needs to be a major catastrophic shift somewhere globally to change a weather pattern where in a single day it does drop, let's say 50 to 70, maybe even 80 degrees, freezing everything, and then to remain that way, there has to be something like a Heinrich event, which you can Google out there, which is like a big releasing of ice from glaciers, some sort of freshwater, saltwater mixing event, something catastrophic globally that would shift the weather pattern globally and keep the cold in a certain region.
Or you have a weakening sun like we have right now, and then you have the work of people like Rolf Wuche and some of the research that has came out of the Sapphire Project about when a plasma sphere changes state from a bright glow to a low glow or dim glow, and the amount of energy output difference between those two. And during that state, that would be a significant climatic event if the sun were to lose 70% of its output power.
Yeah, and I point this out to many people simply because out here it's so extreme. If a cloud rolls by, the temperature drops 20 or 30 degrees where you're standing. It goes from 90, down to 64. And can you imagine if this and that light switch effect could happen after an EMP is ejected from the sun, kind of like a powering down event, like and the sun instantly shuts off. It would instantly get cold, and it would freak out the population, and 90% of the people on the globe would die within a few weeks.
I would say 90% would be gone within a year for sure. A lot would be gone within a few weeks, but they would easily 90% within a year.
Yeah, so you think it would take that long for disease to develop?
I don't think it's so much disease. I think it is the starvation and the cold and the people's inability to get out of the region that they're in after the event transpired, because it's only going to be cold on half the planet. So because you're going back and forth, you know what I mean, as far as your seasons. So one season, one half hemisphere of the planet is going to be in summer, while the other is in winter, and the event transpires. So those people have about 6 months or so to prepare, more so than the people in the wintertime. So you're going to lose some then, immediately, mainly in main cities, big cities. Then, a lot of people in third world countries are going to hold out for a long, long time because they don't use any of the technology that we have. So most of those people, are going to be fine if they live in more of a tropical region between, say, the equator and 20 to 30 degrees latitude above or below the equator. So they're not going to see the cold effects, because really only 30% of the heat that we enjoy on this planet actually comes from the sun. 70% of the heat of the planet actually comes from the planet. Its molten core that's, only about 5 miles down or so. Excuse me, 50 miles down.
We've all felt that warm ocean breeze. Now, next question, Jack Crowley. Ask Lee 2 questions, please. Now, Lee, if you have noticed and you twist and pull or chop your smart meter off directly from the line, will that protect your house?
No. Cut the main breaker inside and cut all of the individual breakers themselves. That's the only way that you can protect your house. And one of the previous questions, they said, is there a redneck way? Yeah, if you ever see the sky glowing, go cut everything off right away.
And unplug everything, too.
Right.
Yeah,
cords are what kills it. And so, and that goes for your laptop. Unplug the cords out of your laptop. Unplug the cord out of the power supply in your computer. Because in the majority of the tests that the Army performed with the DOD and DOE, Department of Energy, so the Department of Defense, in cooperation with the Army and the Department of Energy, did testing with some universities and other people, and found that the vast majority of the time, what fails in your computer first is the power supply. Same thing goes for your cell phones. Your cell phones will live through it, but the power supply going to it won't. So the wall wart is dead. So make sure you have lots of power supplies in your bug-out EMP can. And also, when you go to the EMP can, wrap individual items in 3 layers of aluminum foil, and then put it in a Ziploc baggie and wrap it with tape. That is the Faraday cage. Put that into a smaller trash can, insulated from the outside of that trash can, so it's got cardboard or whatever in it. That is another Faraday cage. Put the smaller trash can into a larger trash can, again insulated with cardboard. That is yet another Faraday cage. Each time you add that Faraday cage to it, you're adding a layer of armored protection against the EMP, electromagnetic pulse, coming to it. And so you're getting anywhere from, say, 30 dB decibels of attenuation per layer up to 70 dB of attenuation per layer. And the more layers of attenuation that you can put in there, the better it is protected. Also, make sure you have no antennas attached to anything, because a wire antenna is what catches the signal and fries the guts of the electronics. So that's going back to the previous question about how can you see and how to protect.
Yeah, skies glowing is bad news, and if you see a wire, it's a fire. Disconnect it. The skies glowed 159 years ago, and they will glow again. And when they're glowing, they're going to glow for an extended period of time. So this is going to be a shelter in place and protect your electronics event when it does occur. Part 2, how do you harden buried black pipe propane lines from the gas tank that feeds a 20 kilowatt Jenny in an elevated wooden shed and the pipe branch that feeds the home, so you don't introduce ground-charged electric spikes to the Jenny and your house. Thanks, you gravel voice guru of electronic voodoo.
Yes, somewhere along in there, you're going to have to get away from the steel pipe, or you're going to have to get away from natural gas. You want that wire, or excuse me, that is a wire as far as the electromagnetic field is concerned. It's a conductor. You're going to want that conductor to be as short as possible. And so you're going to need to get that tank as close as you can. I would go with a high pressure line that I could ground to the exterior of the Faraday cage to the generator, or I would go to diesel fuel. And personally, if it were me, I would go to diesel fuel. You probably get, LP in that, but I would move the tank as close as possible, or come up with a way to isolate the generator from the LP, like putting the low pressure regulator on the outside, and then going to a high pressure, braided line with a fixture on the side of the Faraday cage that's grounded outside of the Faraday cage, and then run a high pressure rubber line inside, or something of that nature, because you can't run the high pressure inside. You're going to have to go inside with the low pressure, because otherwise, if the high pressure line goes inside the Faraday cage, you just brought the signal in there and you've defeated the purpose of the Faraday cage entirely.
Now, Lee, grounded propane tanks, will they explode?
Shouldn't.
Is there a possibility of explosion?
Yes and no. In the tank itself, no. However, when you have a long line and you're talking about a storm that can induce thousands of volts per kilometer into a pipe, there's substantial current in there. And when those magnetic fields come in from, CMEs and EMPs, events like Carrington type events, the rise time of that wave when it comes in is anywhere from like 10 to 100 seconds. So when the first wave comes in, if it's nighttime, everybody's sitting there and looking out, over the city. In a matter of 10 to 100 seconds, all of the electrical lines in the United States that are over, 10, 15, 20 kilometers long, they're going to start to glow right before your eyes, and then they're going to start to glow up, and get brighter and brighter as the wave comes in. And then that wave, because it's kind of like a quasi AC or DC, because it goes one way and then it goes the other way. So that wave will stay energized for thousands of seconds, and then it'll fade back out, taking 10 to 100 seconds to fade back down, and then 10 to 100 seconds to come back up, and it'll start waving on you again. When you look at the effects of that on the grid, it's going to take 10 to 100 seconds for it to come up, and then it can go for as long as 17 to 48 hours, depending upon the size of the storm. Well, guess what? It only took 93 seconds to take Quebec offline. So before the first pulse has fully energized the lines, the majority of the grid is going to be down. And it's going to affect both sides of the planet. It's not just going to affect the side that's facing the sun at the time, because our magnetosphere is going to bring that energy around into the backside also. And what comes into the planet comes out of the planet. So you're going to see it both sides, and the sky's going to glow like you've never seen before.
Yeah, they could read newspapers to the glow. And geomagnetic storms like this reverberate for days. So yes, it's going to go on and be global, just like you said. Now, next question from Semalina. For Lee, when will the cooling be felt across Middle America to the point people will take note?
We will start to see that this winter. in the northern hemisphere. We're seeing it now in the southern hemisphere in Australia and South Africa, getting snows and so on and so forth. We're seeing a little bit of it in the northern hemisphere. We've got snows in Canada that are unusual. We've got snows in the Rockies right now. We've had, snows in other places that were unusually deep and late in the season and early in the season. So this summer we'll see some cooling, but this winter we'll start to see more of it. So it will start to become more prevalent this winter, and it will be much, much, much harder for the global warmist alarmists to hide it anymore, because it'll be to the point where Ray Charles, Stevie Wonder, and Helen Keller can all see what's going on.
And we're at the 206-year relational cycle point when, if on cue, the new Madrid should fault, and that happens in the wintertime, 2017-18 or 18-19, if it is coming on schedule. Now, it could happen all the way to 2021, all the way in any time during this minimum, a major earthquake, because if you follow the work of QuakeWatch.net and Ben Davidson, all the major 9.0s and high 8s, the largest earthquakes on Earth, happen exactly at that flexure point at the minimum.
Right, as the transition coming in and transition coming out. If you look at John Casey's work, as well as Ben Davidson's work, in John Casey's work, you actually can see the curve where they've mapped them out going back solar cycles all the way back to the beginning of 1610. So when you're first diving in like we are right now, and then when you start coming back out, and the problem that we have in this particular scenario, when you look at Valentina Zarkova's work, we come into a dead period, then we come up a little bit, then we go into another dead period, then we come up again, which means that technically we have 4 of these, not 2 that we have to go through. So we're really, really in trouble when it comes to earthquakes and volcanic activity coming up over the next 20 years, because we're in the worst of the worst of the worst over the last 500,000 years. We've never been through one as bad as what we're about to see when you look at it through Valentina Zarkova's work.
Right, and if we're waiting for the minimum, it would be the winter of 2019-2020 that will be the bad period coming up in the most recent future.
Yes.
Yeah, I could see a 9.0 or greater killing lots of people, large tsunami, maybe a large VEI-6 volcano at the same time. And then, like you said, Lee, this is going to repeat on a decadal scale again and again and again and again.
Right. And, we can see that in all of the patterns. What people have to understand is when you talk about Zarkova's work, it's not a model like, oh, well, we think this and we think that. It's not really like that. They actually see the magnetic fields, have measured them since 1953, see all of their patterns and their harmonics and how they interact with each other. And all of this is a predictive model saying we'll see a harmonic here, we'll see a harmonic there. And it's just calculating harmonics, just like harmonics in sound or harmonics in electronics or, electromagnetic interference, first order harmonics, so on and so forth. So it's really easy to see it when you look at it that way because there's no guesswork to it.
In fact, the statistical analysis shows 97% accuracy to her predictions.
Absolutely.
Let's get on with the next question. Fermenti Farm. Could you be kind enough, Lee, to tell Fermenti Farms why you chose Florida and North Carolina to live in? I didn't know you lived in those both places. First, can you confirm you live in both places?
We own land in both places.
Okay, why'd you choose those places? And this guy is in western North Carolina, and he's torn on selling. What are your thoughts? Okay.
We're in somewhat western North Carolina. The property we have isn't that far from Boone. And we chose that just simply because we like the mountains, and it's not too far north, and we wanted it as a vacation property. My wife's a rock hound gem hunter, and so on and so forth, finds fossils and things of that nature. So we wanted a place in the mountains in North Carolina that we can go and get away, not far from the Blue Ridge Parkway. And if it does get bad, you might still be able to get up there every once in a while. If I were going to stay in North Carolina and have a place in North Carolina, the first thing I would consider would be an umbrella home, which is a house that's mainly buried. And then I would incorporate the use of earth tubes on the south side of the house. I would have my hot side. On the north side of the house, I would have my cold side. You want to make sure that all of those tubes enter and exit at the exact same altitude. Otherwise, they will pull air through themselves naturally. Above the earth, above the umbrella home, on the top of it, I would have a greenhouse that you could use for heating, and then I would use solar to run a fan to circulate the air through my earth tubes. And on my cool side of the house, I would have a circulation so as that I could circulate extremely cold air in the wintertime and just circulate that in through on the cold winter nights so as that I'm cooling the cool side. And then in the summertime, I would do the same thing on the hot days to heat the south side and also pull the heat out of the greenhouse and run that through the hot side. That way, in the wintertime, you've got heat from the hot side that you can pull into the lower part of the house. It'll come up through the house and heat the entire house. And then you circulate that back out into the hot side. And then in the summertime, you can pull cool air in through the bottom of the house and bring that up through and help cool the greenhouse. Use that to a natural chimney effect with a black tube, probably about 20 feet long, coming out of the top of the greenhouse. And the heating of that in the daytime will actually pull air up out of that, and we'll pull the cool air in through the earth tubes with no electricity. We'll pull that cool air in through your house and pull it up through the house into the greenhouse to give you nice cool air for your plants, even though they're getting the nice sunlight. And that type of design or multitude of designs have been used quite successfully in places like Vermont, upstate New York, with being able to keep those homes cold in an extremely cold environment. So that's what I would use. And then on my property, I would also want some type of a hydro low head turbine, and I would want a spare voltage regulator for my turbine, so as that if you had an EMP, you would be able to take the turbine off quickly, replace the voltage regulator, and put it right back in, and be right back in and make it power again. So, and I would use
that would mean you would need running water.
For irrigation. Yeah, for running water. Now, the other way you can do that without running water is what I'm doing for my buddy in Texas. He's got 150 acres, and he's building tiny homes on it. So what I've engineered for him is we're putting a well at the top of the hill, and we're going to put a wind well pump up there, an aero motor. That aero motor is going to pump water out of the well into the lake on the top of the hill. As the water comes out of the lake on the top of the hill, it goes through a hydro generator, then it goes to the next lake, goes through another hydro generator, then goes to the next lake, goes through another hydro generator, and then goes to the house for water and goes to the fields for irrigation.
Yeah, if you have the heavy equipment and the landscape for it, you can design some sick systems like that.
Yep. So that's what he's doing. So,
and it's all running off of one of those $20,000 turbines.
Wind turbines.
You know.
Yeah. It's an aero motor. Yeah. Windmill.
Awesome. Anything else to add? That was just an amazing discussion on setup there.
Yes. I mean, I'm doing that for people. I'm being flooded with phone calls because everybody's catching on now, of what to do for their system, what to do for here, there, and yonder. How do I deal with this? So I'm getting ready to put together probably a road show where I'm going to go out and visit with some of these people and do site surveys and say, well, I would put this here and put that there, tie this in, and start getting people ready because time's running out fast.
Yeah, we don't have much time.
Yep.
Green Swamp Bigfooters sends this question. I live on 15 rural acres in Brooksville, Florida, north of Tampa, and I'm wondering if this location is safe for Grand Solar Minimum with SOCOM to the south and the Crystal River nuclear power plant to the north. What are your thoughts?
Okay, well, first off, I don't live in Tampa. I actually live in the Green Swamp. So And yes, this area is safe. That's why both myself and John Casey live here. And that's our preferred region, is a line from Tampa to Daytona. That's about 150 miles wide. And in the state of Florida, that's the best place to be. So that's why we've both settled here. John is in Orlando, and I'm in the Green Swamp. As far as the nuclear facility in Crystal River, my wife and I spoke with the safety director over there, and they discovered cracks in the reactor wall, so they have shut that facility down. It is no longer a nuclear reactor. It is all powered by coal now. As far as SOCOM, that's Southern Command, that's located at McDill, part of my old stomping grounds. If anybody knows the place, I used to work in the building at the end of the runway that's underground. So anyway, that is a target just like any other major city is. Tampa would be a target. It doesn't really matter. We're kind of a decent ways away from that, but you have to look at it as, an EMP against the United States is not going to normally be a conventional nuclear war of where they attack city on city with multitudes of megaton warheads. If you want to take the United States out with a nuclear warhead, all you need is an SA-1, SA-2 missile from Vietnam era and 10 kiloton nuclear warhead in 2 to 4 seconds, and you launch it and set it off, 40 kilometers up over top of Ohio. That'll take out half the United States just with a crude weapon like that. You want to take out the entire United States, you take a megaton weapon and you send it up higher over, the central United States, over Kansas. That famous map that was made in 1962 by the Air Force of, the perfect spot to set off a nuclear warhead. In fact, I know the guy who created that map. He works on the Shares project. But anyway, it's very simple to take a large area out with a nuclear warhead or even a man-made EMP device, which is the size of a slightly oversized briefcase. And so, with a small device like that, you can take out a city if you get some altitude before you set it off. And if you got an older model diesel, you can go to the top of the building, set the thing off, go down the staircase because you won't be using the elevator, and get into your old diesel, fire it up, and drive out of the city while everybody else is sitting there looking around trying to figure out why nothing works.
Now, how many foreign governments have EMP devices in space right now,
We'll be
waiting to be deployed?
I don't know that they have EMP devices in space. They have EMP devices in briefcases. I don't think anyone... Now, North Koreans have 2 satellites.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Ravens. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight to 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Up there, and will destroy all kinds of satellites in space. In fact,
join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. It's going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea. I'm coming live from Kensington. Relax. Let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
So, when you set these things off, the energy that is induced into the conductors, and the pipes, and the metal, and everything else that's out there.
You to join me on a cosmic
you're
journey,
talking in
exploring
some
a
cases,
metaphysical montage of
up
spiritual
to,
material,
200,000
covering everything from the mundane to the magical,
meter
UFOs to
during the
unicorns,
first
and everything in between,
of a large
including
nuclear
spiritual
detonation.
readings for those who seek
And
enlightenment.
then
Let
during
Nightlight
after
provide
the
you
first
with equal
millisecond,
measure of light, love,
up
and
to
laughter, insight,
full
wisdom,
second
and inspiration.
afterwards,
Monday nights,
that
10 to 12
pulse
p.m.
for
Eastern,
that full
right
second
here
can
on
be
Studio
as high as
B,
30,000
Revolution
volts
Radio
per meter.
at
And if you've got a
freedomslips.com.
ground burst nuclear warhead that goes off just a 10 kiloton ground burst,
The opinions
you'll have
expressed
these
on this
kinds
radio
of
station,
voltages
its programs,
40
and its
miles
website
out
by the
from
hosts,
that
guests, and
burst.
call-in listeners or chatters are
Because
solely the opinions
it's
of the
conducted
original
through the
source who
electrical
expressed them.
wires
They do not
all the way
necessarily
up.
represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and
When you talk about
freedomslips.com,
EMP
its staff,
being
or
absorbed
affiliates.
from
You're listening to Revolution
a high
Radio,
altitude
freedomslips.com,
burst or a
100%
CME
listener-supported
coming in
radio,
from
and
the
now
sun
we return you to
in the
your
United
host.
States in transmission lines, high voltage transmission lines. And I have to make this differentiation here. DHS, Department of Homeland Security, refers to a high voltage transmission line of anything that is over 65,000 volts. And that's really not, in the industry, that's not a high voltage transmission line. It's more like a feeder distribution, low voltage distribution. In the industry, voltages of excessive, like 150,000 or 115,000 volts is actually a high voltage transmission line. But of those high voltage transmission lines, there are 500,000 miles of those in the United States. And then in addition to that, the local power lines, there's an additional 450,000, there is an additional 4,500,000 miles, 5,500,000 miles, because there's 6 million miles of power line in the United States. So all of that is going to see the induced voltage of a CME or of an EMP, whether it be a ground burst or high altitude burst, and that is going to carry that current all over the network. The worst part about it is the newer high voltage transmission lines are worse than the older ones because they conduct electricity worse, so they're going to cause more damage. And you were talking about in the show with Anita that you were going to have all these fires all over the United States. You'll never guess what I found out today. During these large EMP, CME events, they found out that the actually insulators will fail and the electric lines will fall to the ground. So that's not the case in all of them, but it is the case in a bunch of them. And then the other thing that I found out that was interesting, because I was doing a little bit of research before the show, is they talk about one in every, or 3 or 4 out of every, say, 1,500 to 2,000 transformers will fail. What they don't tell you is that the one that fails is the main distribution transformer. So it's not the one on the pole out in front of your house. It's the big one at the substation that's gone. And so there's been a major concern that there are no manufacturing facilities of these transformers in the United States. So the Department of Energy has gotten in contact with a transformer manufacturer, and they're going to be opening up a manufacturing facility in Tennessee to produce generators that are 765 kVA and below. So that's to help mitigate the effect of a CME or an EMP on the United States, and not being so dependent upon having those transformers produced in foreign countries and brought into the U.S.
Well, it sounds like a little too late, but I guess anything is better than nothing. What are your thoughts on?
Better late than never.
So you heard it here live from Lee Wheelbarger. The Green Swamp is a safe place if you're in northern Florida. That's a heads up. Next question coming from Kelly Hamilton. How effective will solar panels be during the grand solar minimum if the cloud nucleation, cloud cover from numerous volcanoes, etc., affect solar input?
they
also,
will lose.
What is your opinion on brilliant light power, including BLP's sun cell energy source? Never heard of that. If you could tell us more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that either. I don't recommend anything that I haven't thoroughly tested. So, if they want me to take a look at one, they're more than welcome to send me one. There's also a group of people out of Texas that have engineered supposedly an EMP-proof 3 kW inverter plus solar charge controller that uses ferrite cores and chokes on it. So that's supposed to be, EMP-proof. Again, I would have to test that before I would recommend it, but I do plan on testing those once I get in touch with those people. As far as the solar panels, like I said, you're going to have about a 70% loss in productivity from the solar panels under cloudy conditions. You will want to, under those conditions, have the panels mounted perfectly flat. You do not want them angled. The reason being is under totally overcast conditions, the panel is trying to receive energy from the entire sky. And so you want to get that energy from horizon to horizon. So if the panel is angled, you're not getting that. Part of the panel is seeing the ground. And, so you want that panel to be flat, and you want as high a performance panel as you can get, and expect a 60 to a 70% reduction in output power on cloudy days.
Excellent. And we are using monocrystalline panels here because after doing my research, they are the longest lasting and most efficient panels. What do you know about monocrystalline versus the other?
I have SunPower X21 monocrystalline panels on my yacht. And I researched them for years, and that's the panel I chose. It's a X21, which is 21.8% efficient.
Excellent. So we're both going to monocrystalline. You ready for the next question?
Yes, sir.
Brew 12. Lee, what is the average number of volcanoes erupting at any time versus the number erupting now?
I don't know what the average number is off the top of my head. I can tell you that number has jumped significantly and is continuing to rise. As we continue to go into the grand solar minimum, we're going to continue to see it rise. The other thing that gives away that we're moving into a more volcanic type of condition is just look at the lava that is flowing out of Fissure 8 in Hawaii, and look at the volume that's coming out of that, look at the color of it, and look at how thin that is and how fast it's flowing, which is telling you that there's deep lava coming up. So there's a lot of stuff going on under the Earth's mantle right now, and we're going to be continuing to see way more volcanic activity, because if we use history as a guide, we're just now getting started on volcanic activity.
Yeah, and scientific evidence is supporting what we're saying. And as we go into as we've entered the modern era, it's only recently that we can even monitor, let's say, how many volcanoes are actually erupting on the surface. Many of these volcanoes in Kamchatka, people don't know for days if they actually erupted. And if you check Volcano Discovery or you look at volcanoes like I do, it's very hard to get information on remote volcanoes. So we do not know ever how many volcanoes are erupting at any one time. And then you add that to the fact there are thousands of underwater volcanoes, some of which we're aware of, some of which we're discovering every day, like the dozens under the Antarctic ice sheet. We just don't know how many volcanoes are erupting ever. But based on the science, we predict them to be increasing. So if there's 100 on average, there should be 150 during a grand solar minimum. What's different is that you have larger sustained eruptions. These are the rapid cooling type events like Krakatoa, typically during these cosmic ray flux periods. And that's what can cause chaos.
Correct. And I also wanted to point out that we knew about all of the volcanoes under the South Pole and the melting that was causing, and have known that for a number of years. It's only been in the last maybe month that NASA has finally acknowledged what we have known for almost half a decade.
Okay, next question. This is from Leo Hogan. This question is for Lee. With the pole flip about to occur in the next decade or so, and that's just hypothetical, Leo. So a lot of people are talking about 2035 at being the time, maybe the earliest time for that. Leo's asking if it could trigger a full-blown ice age in a matter of a few years.
My answer to that would be no, because ice ages are caused by basically TSI reaching the planet. And our magnetosphere is not disappearing, it's just moving. So there may be some cloud cover in different places. Snow patterns might be a little bit different. Weather patterns will surely be different. But as far as the amount of TSI hitting the planet, that really shouldn't change that much. And the magnetosphere will fluctuate a little bit, but I do not ever see, and there's no correlation that I can find of every time we've had a pole flip or a magnetic excursion being able to correlate that to glaciation periods. And that's been looked at by a lot of people, including myself.
Yeah, indeed. But it does correlate with mass extinction, which is kind of interesting. In my geologic work, I find a precessional cycle pattern throughout all of geologic history. And the problem we were struggling with in the early times, back in the 80s, was that a lot of this geologic time, there's no ice, hypothetically, on Earth. There's no glaciation, yet this climate cycle keeps being driven, this cycle of mass extinction without the ice. So there's some other mechanism that we're still on the cusp of learning about that is driving these, and I think that the magnetic reversals has to do with the non-ice age climate shifts that we can see in the past. Do you have any thoughts on that, Lee? I mean, yeah, Lee?
Have not studied that enough to be able to tie down the extinction events with the pole shifts. I haven't tied those two together. I'm more in the sun and what's going on there and the temperature differences, not so much the extinction events. I'm just trying to survive this one, so I'm not part of the next one.
All right, this is coming from Mary Poppins. Here in the UK, they're having the most abnormal summery summer they've ever known. The weather forecast keeps giving cloudy days ahead, but change the nearer we get, almost just to not look so odd. Only clouds I'm seeing are the ones produced by planes that can last for hours as haze. I'm wondering what the UK will be looking at in terms of severe weather come this winter. We are kind of in a little bubble with no earthquakes or volcanoes. I'm thinking we would probably be facing floods and severe cold. Do people think the grid will go down globally? That's it.
I would say it would be colder and wetter and look more for moving back in towards Maunder minimum type conditions over the next decade. There will eventually be ice skating on the Thames again, in my opinion. Would the grid go down globally from a CME? Probably not. You're still going to have parts of the planet. It depends upon the size of the CME, but still you're going to have parts of the planet that are not going to be affected like other parts of the planet. The big thing on a CME as far as attacking the grid is the insulators and the transformers and the generators, things that have windings in them and things that insulate that extremely high voltage from ground, which is where it's trying to get to. And like I was saying before, what they've found is when that takes place, it will arc across the insulator and actually burn the insulator out, and the wires will fall to the ground, blowing and catching things on fire. So there will be a lot of fires during the event. But I can't say that all of the grid will be down. It would be dependent upon the size. And by the way, it's estimated that, and this is from the government, a X-27 flare is what it takes to do damage significantly on the planet. So anything above an X-27 is when you need to watch your derriere.
Well, that's a good number to look for. Now, what are your thoughts, and I have an opinion on this, obviously, on the climate change significantly reducing the population, just the climate change? What are your thoughts of it significantly reducing the population?
Oh, it will significantly reduce the population. It has historically every single time. 3 million people died in France in a single year. Millions died in Scotland. Millions died in the UK. Millions and millions died all across Europe. So if you look back in history, every time this happens, there is an extinction event of all species of animal on this planet, including the human race.
Now,
and I don't want to say extinction. I want to say die-off. I shouldn't say extinction.
Yeah, and if you look into the historical facts, what you're going to find is that it's not the actual climate change that drives the die-offs. The infrastructure fails, which is why we have this preparedness show. Because if the infrastructure fails and you're ready to and prepared, then you don't have to worry about the infrastructure failing. You then have to worry about global unrest. So the big thing that happens during these events is that perturbations to the climate as we move through the climate shift cause infrastructure to fail, starting with global food production, delivery, and if during all of this the grid gets shot down because of the sun, look out.
Well, what people have to understand is throughout the world there are 18 different critical infrastructures. If you damage any of those 18 critical infrastructures, you will significantly impact the economy of the world. The problem is if you damage one of those 18 infrastructures, being electricity, you will simultaneously take down the 17 other remaining infrastructures. So it will be a complete collapse. And the problem is, and it's already been research from U.S. Army, Air Force, DOE, DOD has been done after a significant event, whether it be an EMP or a CME. What they have found is that the entire system is controlled digitally. So let's say that there's a CME coming in, and Dr. Tavasco from Space Weather Prediction Center says, hey, we've got an X-30 coming. So all of the, I think it's 167 power companies in the United States get together and say, okay, we're going to shut down 30 minutes before it gets here because that's the recommendation, because insulators survive much better, as well as transformers and generators do, if there's no load on the system at the time that the storm comes in. So, they would all shut down. But the problem is there's relays and disconnects and interconnects and so on and so forth, 3 major power grids in the United States. There's the Eastern District, the Western District, and Texas. And they all interconnect. But there's numerous other interconnects that are out all over the United States that have wires going to them, like Cat5 and so on and so forth. The problem is the storm will destroy every single one of those control systems that controls that interconnect. And so when it does that, it will take up to a year for the power companies in the United States to be able to restore power throughout the United States, because every single one of those control modules will have to be manufactured and replaced throughout the 6 million miles of power in the United States. Now, in addition to that, you got a bigger problem, because all of those control systems that are all digital, guess what? They work over the internet. Is the internet up? Nope. You say, well, there's fiber ran everywhere. That's great, but every single one of those fibers has a relay to it. And so there's a relay every so many thousand feet for every single one of those fibers, and every single one of those relays will be fried. Transatlantic cables during the Carrington event, the transatlantic cable going all the way across from the United States to Europe was fried and had to be replaced. When the Russians in 1962, we set off our airburst nuclear warhead in July of 1962. The Russians followed in October, but they launched theirs instead of being over the Pacific in an extremely rural location or extremely remote location. The Russians launched theirs over top of Kazakhstan, and it fried all of their telephone communications, all of their power lines, caught a power generation facility on fire, and since then the Russians have buried all of their telephone main trunk lines deeply underground in tunnels, and have all kinds of other protection on it as part of their military and national preparedness. Their phone company is actually protected by their government. It's not a bunch of little companies like we have. So they have a very robust, redundant, and strengthened and protected telephone infrastructure as opposed to any other country in the world. No country in the world has a system even a tenth as robust as what Russia has. And that was what they learned from 1962. We didn't get that information until I think it was 1994 when we were able to actually talk with them after the fall of the Iron Curtain. And it wasn't even brought into a report that the U.S. government could look at until I think 2002, 2003. And then the last update to all of the data that we gleaned from our experiments, their experiments, and other tests that are being performed, that was last updated in 2007. And so that's the latest update of major testing and major research, although there are numerous programs taking place right now all over the country to try to provide some preparedness for what we've got coming.
It seems like Russia and China are more prepared with their grid and their hardening. It seems like Russia and China are more prepared with their food security and their growing. What is preventing Russia and China from using EMP weapons and just taking over the United States quickly?
The big problem would be that the global economy would be destroyed. Satellites all over the planet would go down, and commerce would come to a halt because the effects of that, you would lose satellite communications for a year or two, probably 2 years.
You have to put new satellites up.
Yeah, so you'd have balls of metal falling out of the sky. 4th of July for 2 years and stuff falling out of the sky all the time. There's
fun times.
67,000 substantial objects being tracked right now.
Yeah, and there's a catastrophic effect that can happen. It's like the ping pong effect. I've seen video on it. If where one gets perturbed, they can all hit each other and hello.
In very short order. And the highest contributor to space junk so far is Elon Musk. So with his Tesla in space, NASA is so upset about that, as well as a bunch of other people in the military that I've talked to. They're just totally perturbed at him launching that. And what
some rich D-bag junking up space up there. It's kind of like all the mountain climbers on Everest, though. It's no different.
Yeah, it is. Well, actually, in this case, it's worse. Because the mountain climbers in Everest, they're only polluting the top of Everest, whereas this can destroy communications and infrastructure and so on and so forth all over the world for decades and decades to come. And actually, it's a cascading effect. Once you have the first collision, then it's inevitable. I mean, we've only really had two bad ones up there to think of, one being a collision between two satellites, and then the other when the Chinese went up and blew their own bird out of the sky, which created space junk that's flying all over the place and still is. So, and will be for a long time. and the government's talking about actually fining people and penalizing them for creating space junk, which I think is actually a great idea. Because if you're not,
I agree. These rich idiots are junking up Everest. They're junking up space, and they've got us teetering on the edge of complete infrastructure failure because they've literally used crony capitalism to milk the general public, to extract wealth from all of humanity, and they don't care if an EMP comes off of the sun. But they're certainly not setting off an EMP weapon to take over more countries because they know it would damage their satellites. It's hilarious. It's a catch-22.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, because any satellite, doesn't matter if it's yours, theirs, or somebody else, if it's in that region and it's a ground burst, it's gone. And if it's an air burst, you can forget it because they're just going to be falling out of the sky like leaves in the fall.
Oh, I love the fall. Let's get on with the question. Stoic God asks, do you believe hurricanes hitting the Caribbean islands such as the Dominican Republic or the Bahamas will get stronger as we descend further into the grand solar minimum?
No. I think the number of hurricanes will continue to decrease, but what you're going to have is more atmospheric compression events. So you're going to see more things like Harvey. So not more Harveys, just storms like Harvey when you have them. So heavy rain, a lot of flooding.
I agree. I tend to agree. And you got cut off for a second there. But so larger, slower moving storms, they get stalled out and can dump dozens of inches of rain, causing catastrophic flooding, but less likely. So I agree with you there. Let's get on with the next question. Doug P. Dear Lee, since we can detect solar activity via satellite hours, days before it gets here, what would that not be enough time to preemptively pop the breakers and shut down the grid, at least prevent damage to the big hard to replace transformers in the event of solar flare? We kind of covered this.
Well, you can't protect you cannot protect a transformer. All testing by all governments all over the world, and it has been adamantly expressed, you cannot protect, no matter what they say, you cannot protect a transformer. You can disconnect it to help decrease the risk of damage, but you cannot protect a transformer. And you will not be able to protect the insulators because they're in direct contact with the wires that are receiving the induced voltage.
So these super hardened military complexes have to be underground then, and in Faraday cages.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So we can't really do that on the surface to the major portions of the grid. How are these cities and states like Alabama and hardening the grid? How are they doing it?
It's Louisiana, North Carolina, South Carolina. And what they're doing is they're grounding everything outside the buildings. They're building the buildings as Faraday cages. And they're doing rapid disconnects that are really long so that if there is power on it at the time when the storm comes in, it increases the distance of the connector. So it's a longer arc. It has to be a higher voltage to be able to arc across it. So there's a wide variety of different things. I mean, we could do a show on just what's in one of those buildings.
And these are the substations. So they're actually hardening the substations.
The substations and the power generation. The state of Louisiana is the first state that has in that region part of this infrastructure being installed. And then the Carolinas, both North and South, are working together to work across the state of North and South Carolinas to integrate this protective system in their power generation as well as distribution network. They're the three states that are leading the country in the United States.
So they might be way stations, so to speak, or oases in a time of need when the grid goes down. Those places may be protected, or they may be protected enough to be some of the first areas to come back up.
Yes, and that's what they're trying to do, is to make it so that they can take the grid offline quickly in one of these events, protect it as much as possible from an EMP, and be able to pull it down from a CME. And one of the other misconceptions that people have is it takes days to get here. No. Small CME, it takes days to get here. when you have something like an X, 27 or 40 or 45 or what have you, you're talking about that storm being here anywhere from 12 to 17 hours later. So you don't have 24 hours. You've got, 17 to 18 hours at most from the time of the eruption.
Yeah, the initial effects can start arriving 7 to 11 hours after a big event, the shockwave initial. So that's a heads up. So there's not much time, so you have to really be on it and get your stuff out of harm's way. Now, Doug P. has a second part. He says he heard a claim that a lot of current will be induced into and damage the steel rails across the country. Are they not at nearly ground potential and thus immune? What are they talking about?
He's talking about the current that is induced from a CME or an EMP into those rails. Okay. And yes, they are at ground potential, but the ground is energized also.
Yeah.
Okay. The bigger problem that we have now, we did have railroads in 1859, but the rails in 1859 were bolted together, and they were old iron rails, and they didn't conduct electricity as well, and so on and so forth. The problem we have today is with Class 1 railroads, which, Union Pacific, Norfolk Southern, CSX, people like that, BNSF, those railroads are what's called a welded rail. And so they actually use thermite or electricity to join the rails together physically. So you have long spans of rail that it is not broken. The only place that you're going to find that rail is broken on those mainline railroads, Class A railroads, and of course the FEC, Florida East Coast, they're welded rail even though they're not a Class A. Those rails will conduct electricity until they get to the switches, or where they have different blocks for the block detection, or anywhere that there's a grade crossing where the railroad track goes across a road that is a paved road and has a signal light that activates automatically and gates that come down. You don't necessarily have to have the gates, but if the lights activate automatically, that rail will be broken there. So if you were to be standing, even with the ground potential, if you were to stand there and be right at where they call the crossing the grade, that's an insulated section of the track at that grade crossing. If you were to be touching the grade crossing and then touch the rail that extended down for miles, there's a very good possibility it would knock the stuffings out of you. Same thing goes for barbed wire fences that aren't grounded or any other metal conductor that is in excess. I mean, look, you're talking about, during an EMP, 50,000 to 200,000 volts per meter. So it doesn't take a long wire. When you're talking about, the solar side of that, as far as a CME, you can still have up to thousands of volts per kilometer on that wire. So that's still a substantial amount of power. And if you're talking about a section of rail, a section of rail, if you're not in a passing siding, could easily exceed 13,000 feet. Even longer than that, if you're talking about going out across, central parts of the United States where Union Pacific runs, they've got sections out there that's miles and miles and miles, no breaks in the rail whatsoever. Over those, you're talking large voltages supplied. So all of the sensors that detect the approach of those locomotives to those switches, the block detection for all of the blocks that the trains are in, for the ATCS, Advanced Train Control System, as well as the new PTCS, all that's going to be fried. That's all going to be gone. So the railroads are going to be operating with the old balls and flags and track warrants, and same way they did during the Civil War after this, because their communications control system is all going to be down. And if you're talking about companies like CSX or BNSF, the majority of their control over the ATCS and PTS system is done through satellite now. So all that's going to be offline as well. So, yeah, there will be power in the rails.
Yeah, so you heard it here. If the sky is glowing and an X-40 is headed towards Earth and you get a warning, stay away from barbed wire fences, anything metal, lines, wires, power lines. Pitch a tent, stay in the field, move to the center of your house, unplug all your appliances, hit the breakers, cut everything. or you're going to be in Fireville.
Yes.
Now, here's an awesome question, which is my question, which I wanted to ask after the show, but now I don't have to because it's in one of the questions. Stephen Wagner, who is one of our biggest fans, just got into beekeeping, has an awesome kid and they both got stung in the eye. But anyway, let's get to the question. He's got a Quonset hut. He doesn't even know what it is. I have one laying out here too. I got cheap, $5,000, and it's ginormous. I haven't put it together. These are these massive steel buildings with 1,000 bolts. They come together in ribs, all different kinds of Quonset huts, round ones, the alpine peaked ones. They're literally bomb-proof, crush-proof. How do you make them EMP-proof? How do we make a gigantic Faraday cage so we can put our tractor in there, our UTVs, and all our equipment, and they'll be safe? How do we do it? Because I want to do it, and I need to know how.
Okay, the first thing you're going to have to do is you got to make sure that all of the doors are metal. Second thing you need to do is you make sure that you have a ground strap that goes from that door to the side of the building to make sure that it's grounded well to it. And then you
now, wait a minute. Before we go any further, Lee, do the end walls have to be metal too? Metal to metal? Because these Quonset huts, the Quonset huts come without the end walls. So when we install the end walls, they have to be metal.
Yes, or if you do it out of wood, what you can do is you can take copper screen or stainless steel screen and just staple it up all over that wall. And all you have to do is along the edge where the copper meets the steel, you have to bond that. So either clamp it down, put metal tech screws through, and make a good electrical connection all the way around to do that on both ends. The object is to try to make a waterproof sphere. That's what you want to try to do. But you can use screen because it'll stop it. But it would have to be, you have to seal it all the way around. Then on your doors, where your doors slide together, you're going to want to have some type of a rubber gasket there that's covered with a screen so that when those two doors come together, those two wire screens are making good, clean electrical contact. If it's a swing door that's on a hinge that swings open, you swing the door all the way open, and then you attach a screen from on the inside of the hinge from the door to the inside of the door jamb, and that way when the door becomes closed, there's a screen that blocks any of that signal from coming in from the outside. You can put steel wool in there, anything that just prevents any energy from coming in. And that's the best protection from a CME. And then inside that, I would buy a small solid steel shipping container, 20 foot, whatever you want. Set that up on wooden blocks so there's no electrical connection between that metal box and the Quonset hut. And then that is another layer of shielding. And then pull your ATVs and so on and so forth in that. Throw an EMP blanket over them, and then have all of your electronics and your voltage regulators and additional solar power stuff and all that stuff that you need to protect from the EMP and CME. Have all of that wrapped up in aluminum foil, wrapped up in tape or plastic, put inside a trash can, seal that trash can, and then put that trash can inside that metal shipping container. And then on the shipping container, you want to make sure that all of the doors are sealed and there's good electrical contact between the door and the shipping container itself, and keep those doors closed unless you're going in or out. And that will give you, with the Quonset hut, the shipping container closed up around it, stuff inside the trash can or underneath the blanket inside, you're looking, probably close to 120, 150, maybe even 170 dB of attenuation, depending upon, how good you seal up your building, your shipping container, your trash cans, and recommend a minimum of 3 layers of aluminum foil, the thickest aluminum foil you can get. And you can do that in multiple layers too. So if you don't want to have a trash can, you can take an item, wrap it in aluminum foil, put it in a plastic bag so it's insulated, put 3 more layers of aluminum foil, put it in another plastic bag, 3 more layers of aluminum foil, and you've now just made 3 separate layers or layered armor to protect that item inside from the RF energy or EMI, electromagnetic interference from an EMP or CME getting into that.
So redundancy is the key here, clearly.
Multi-layers, just like stick protecting from cold weather, layers works. Same thing does for EMP. CME.
Okay, next question from Laura Veronica Speedwell. Lee, would you install lightning protectors on a roof? Be good idea in western North Carolina mountains. After listening to Anita, I'm pondering if anything can guard against both CME, EMP charge, and also protect from stronger electrical storms. Or if all breakers fuses are off, will that be enough? And then we'll do the second half.
All right. All breaker fuses is good, and disconnecting all the cords and everything is best. Lightning protection, I highly recommend not putting lightning rods or lightning arresters on your house. It's great to put it on the electrical circuits from the pulse coming in, but do not, under any circumstances, put a lightning rod on top of your house or next to it. Research has been done with insurance, especially in Australia, where the insurance companies were paying to put in these lightning arresters and so on and so forth. And after 10 years, the insurance company went back and found that there was 70% increase in lightning damage on the houses that they had installed the lightning protection in, because the lightning rod was acting as a step leader for the lightning to hit. So you're better off not doing that. So I recommend against that. And I've got experience in that. I had a communication system that I did with the Navy in Sugar Grove, West Virginia, at the NSA facility there. It's an underground monitoring facility. And I used to do their perimeter communications. And I was asked to install a communication system on their tower for all of their security personnel. And so I said, okay, so I designed it, I put it on, and when I installed it, I made no physical electrical connection between the transmitter, the batteries, and the antenna and the hard line to the tower itself. So I totally isolated everything. I acted like a bird sitting on a power line. Well, my system ran there for years. Finally, one day, I was monitoring the system, and the transmitter started giving a low voltage alarm. So I drove to the top of the mountain, and lightning had struck the tower, excuse me, and blown all of the electronics in the building. We're talking $1.3 million worth of microwaves and communications and so on and so forth, was all fried, except for my system. Because the lightning had hit the tower, because I was insulated, went right past my antenna, right past the hard line, right past the repeater, right past the receiver, didn't do any of that. Damaged everybody else because it came in through the ground, and the only thing it did to me was blown a 2-amp glass ATC fuse, which cost me about 20 cents. And so that was in my power supply that went from 110 volts to 12 volts, and I ran the entire system off 12 volts. That's how I insulated myself from the electric grid. I had a lightning arrestor that arrested it, and even though lightning hit, I had a lightning arrestor, it still blew the fuse on a power supply. That's the advantage of being insulated, because electricity wants to take the path of least resistance. And if you're putting up a lightning arrestor, you're creating that path of least resistance. And that pulse of energy when that lightning bolt hits is the same as the E3 shock wave of an EMP. It's the same. The wavelength is a lot longer as far as the frequency, and the rise time and stuff is a little bit different, but it's still the same type of energy hitting as a lightning strike when an EMP goes off. So I highly recommend against putting that anywhere near your house. If you want to put up lightning, put it up on a hill that's 2 or 3 miles away from your house. That way you're always drawing it over there as opposed to bringing it to your house.
Yeah, put your lightning rod on the highest hill on your property, far away from your house. You don't want to draw lightning anywhere near your house, because it's going to be increasing in size, strength, and stature as the magnetosphere wanes, as we descend into the grand solar minimum and the sun shuts down. The storms become more violent, the electrical potential increases, and we see lightning lighting up the planet. It's only going to get worse. Lives are going to be lost. Protect yours by putting a lightning rod far up on the hill, a mile away from where you are. Don't put it on your house. What about hail protection for skylights? This is from Laura Veronica Speedwell.
expanded metal.
So if you know a hailstorm's coming, you put up a panel, or
yeah, or you can just leave it up there and the light will still shine through it. You can put, like you were talking about, for protecting your solar panels.
Hardware cloth.
Or the expanded metal, which is like catwalk type material.
Oh yeah, that's even better.
You can put that over top of it. Yeah, and the light shines through it.
Okay, awesome.
You don't have to get up there.
Besides skills and knowledge, what is the number one investment which people can make as money, which could be bartered in the times to come? Number one investment. Yeah, food, supplies, stores, 10 cans of food.
Water, seeds.
So my stockpiles of seeds and food are not for me because I'm going to be growing it and saving my own seeds and having my own food. It's to trade with people. I don't want to eat that crap. I want to be surviving and thriving on my own self-resilience, and I want to have all the supplies just in case it gets really bad, but mostly for trade, food.
Yeah, and it's like, my wife is collecting, flour and oil and, wheat and rice and beans, the things to be able to make breads and so on and so forth, the raw basic ingredients. You look at what was available in a store in the late 1800s, and that's what you want to have.
Yeah, get the staples, seal them well, use Mylar, remove the oxygen, use the techniques Lee and I talked about, liquid nitrogen, if you can get your hands on it. There's lots of ways you can cheaply prep thousands of pounds of food if you do your homework and you stockpile it correctly. It has to be kept at the right temperature, out of the sun. It's not that hard, and it doesn't cost that much, and you need to start now.
That's the advantage of a root cellar.
Yeah, indeed. Questions for Lee and Diamond from James Crouch. What exists now to have a truly private phone radio conversation? And how does a person not get eaten in the wilderness?
Well, in the United States, there is no such thing as a truly private communication. If the government can listen to anything that transmits in the United States, if they can't, it's illegal. So, yeah, I would suggest that if you wanted to have
encrypted emails, that's the only way I can think of.
Right, and that's even openable.
Questionable.
I mean, yeah. Well, no, it's decryptable. It's like a guy I worked with for many, many, many years. Worked with the CIA and the DIA, and he told me when I was young, when I was like 21 years old, he said, Lee, there is nothing that you will ever transmit that will not be received, and there is nothing that you can ever encrypt that cannot be decrypted. And that's stuck with me for 32 years now. So, you can't, the government in the United States will not allow you to have a technology that they cannot breach. If they do, then you're in violation of National Security Act. So it doesn't matter what they advertise. This is 256-bit encryption. So what? Uncle Sam can break it. Because if they can't sell it in the U.S. So, cell phones, you can forget those. I would go, if it were me, I wanted to have private communications, I would contact Transcript International, which is who used to make the encryption for the feds when I was actually building those types of communication systems for them. So I would go with Transcript International and get a DES card, which is a digital encryption standard, or you can get a e.s.t, which is now the secure telephone encryption format, which I worked on right before I left the military and the government. So that's what I would use. I would contact Transcript International and see what they recommend for the frequency ranges he so chooses to operate in, whether it be cellular, analog, or digital. Their equipment works on all formats.
Excellent. Now, as far as how to survive in the wilderness, I'll go over this real quick. Go in a group, light a fire, bring weapons, learn wild edibles, know how to hunt. Make noise. Now, the problem with making noise and lighting a fire is you may attract people. And depending on the times and where you're at, you need to have weapons to protect yourself from the people that are coming. You could also do a smaller scale type of fire. and you can use human urine and other ways to mark camps, but going together in groups, making some noise, typically keeps wildlife away. Do you have anything else to add, Lee?
No, not really. That pretty much covers everything.
Yeah, and don't bed down in a hollow tree with claw marks on it. This coming from Texas rancher, Dear Lee, is there a difference between neutrinos and muons? And what are the effects they have on Earth?
Oh, absolutely. There's a difference between the two. And the muons are small neutral items. That's why they got their name. So they don't really do anything. And the others do interact with the atmosphere ever so slightly, changing biological as far as gases and things of that nature. And then there's now new research, because they're so small, there's now new research that says that because of the charged energies, they can actually, or charged potentials, they can actually bond with other small particles and actually create additional nucleation in the atmosphere. But as far as like the muons, I wouldn't worry about that. They're all over the place. So not that I wouldn't worry about them. They're just part of the small part of the nucleation process.
Yeah, and the muons that are present in siliceous rich magma, those are the things that are getting heated by the cosmic rays. So the cosmic rays are so tiny and so fast as they travel through the Earth, the only particle they hit is the muon, which is a subatomic particle. And the hypothesis is that the friction created by cosmic rays hitting the muons in the siliceous rich magma, which is in the subsurface, is what causes these volcanoes to erupt. So it's not, the muons aren't falling from space, they're already in the Earth, in the magma chambers.
Yes, they are there as well, but there are some coming in when we have the reaction.
I mean, they're everywhere. They're muons.
Right. But I'm saying there are more made from cosmic rays coming in. That's what I was referring to.
Yeah, now Yeti through hiker. I'm trying to set up a homestead farm on an island in the South Puget Sound in Washington State. If the next big Cascadia earthquake doesn't take me out, what's the best option to set up an off-grid well? Wells in the area are 200 feet deep. I would like to use a hand pump or solar setup, but would like the ideas that you know how to simplify these systems. Also, can you run multiple systems with just one wellhead?
Yes. And so what I would do is I would get an aero motor and put it on top of the highest hill you got. Don't care about the depth of the well. No big deal. The aero will take care of it. Then underneath the aero motors are a four-legged tower. In the middle of that, where the drive rod goes down into the top of the well, you can get an attachment to put a hand pump well on that. So you just simply, if the wind's not blowing, you just disconnect the rod coming down from the windmill, and you can work the hand pump and get your water. I would take that water when it's running off of wind power and put that into a storage tank, which will provide you, and I would get a vertical tank that's pretty tall. I would go with maybe 20 feet or so standing up, so you're going to have a minimum of 10 pounds of head pressure when that's full, just at the base of the tank. Then you can run that to your house. You can use that for pressurized water in your house. You can also use that water for generating electricity and irrigation purposes. So that's what I would use.
Now, do those well pumps, the ones we've been talking about, do they have backup pressure tanks so that when the wind's operating, you build pressure so that you can water when there's no wind?
No, the way I do that is with gravity feed and head pressure. So I have put a tank on top of a hill. And so
when the wind's blowing, you fill that tank.
Right. And then that tank sits there as my reservoir and holds that potential energy that's gravity fed to give me pressure in the house and for irrigation purposes.
And these pumps can pump quarter-mile distance, long distance?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. I think we're definitely investing in them. The more we talk about them, the more it's the number one thing on my list, even though
everybody's
the price is high.
List should be on number one thing on everybody's list.
Okay, excellent.
Water is number one.
Yeah. Here it is, Lee, the big one. This is from ABBB. Dear Lee, your best guess with solar, political, economic conditions brewing. How much time do we have to prep?
The time to prep is now.
Yeah, indeed.
You should have, as the old colonel used to say to me, all of your feces consolidated by now. So you should already have your water. You should already have your communications. You should already have your food, your seeds, your plan, your bug out stuff, your ammunition, what you're planning to do. Now is the time to be doing all of that. What's going to happen is that the knowledge that we're sharing with you is going to grow. And there will become a time where the mainstream media picks it up and starts running with it. And at that point in time, you won't be able to find a battery because everybody and their brother is going to run to the stores and run to the manufacturers, and they're going to offset the supply and demand chain, and you won't be able to get it. So, you want an aero motor, you best be ordering it now. If you want beans, bullets, and Band-Aids, you best be getting it now. There isn't time to wait and say, oh, well, I'll do it next year. This type of event can happen any time starting now. So it's not like, do I need to install brakes on my car? Eventually you're going to need them. So, how far you can drive without them is up to you, but sooner or later you're going to need the brakes. And if you ain't got them, that's when it's going to hit the fan. So I say prepare with everything you got now because you're going to save money. It's going to be cheaper now than it is going to be buying it in the future. You've got it on hand and you're practicing. That's the number one thing. People need to practice what you're doing. It's one thing to read about it. Go out and camp. Start your own garden. Figure out how to be a gardener. It's not as simple as reading a book and putting the seed in the ground. Don't work that way. Never has for me anyway.
No, you're not going to be able to assemble a 14-kilowatt solar system while you're panicking and the skies are darkening. Trust me, it's not going to happen. You need to be properly prepared, or there will be piss poor performance. We know that. Here's a really interesting question. We only have a couple more minutes left. There may not be a commercial break, so at some point they'll cut us off. I have no idea because there hasn't been a commercial, and we're now 2 hours in almost. 3 minutes left. This coming from Dirty Harry, 357. Lee, what do you think of Rolf Wishy's work and the sun going inactive in 2050 due to the primer fields going out of phase? You know Rolf Wishy's work?
I'm very familiar with Rolf Wishy's work. There is that possibility. Now, I do have, how do I put this? I like Rolf, but I do have a couple of issues with some of the things that he recommends. I don't really think that the island thing going around the equator is going to work out real well.
Made of basalt, the basalt highway?
Yeah, the basalt highway. I don't think that's going to work out real well. But the other thing is when you look at Rolf's work, and Rolf says, oh, well, when the primer fields get down to so far that the sun will collapse. Well, the difference is that point in all of my research of which the sun changes is at 30 to 40% of energy as opposed to 0. So on the solar wind speed. So, according to my math on that, we're looking at a danger of that when the solar wind speed from the coronal holes drops below 200 kilometers per second. So when we get to that point is when I would be concerned, not when we get to 0, according to Wolf. So
yeah, and as we know, if you watch the sun will diminish in solar wind. It went down below 300, but it spikes back up. There are solar storms still as we go into this grand minima, which will bring us back out of those lows. But 200, whew, that will be interesting times.
Yeah, and so will a 1 nanotesla interplanetary magnetic flux, which I'm patiently awaiting Dr. Curry's response on that.
Now, what about plasma storms in the atmosphere? Not the aurora kind, but the mountain-making kind. When the molten dust and rocks and oil falling from the sky, according to the late Michael Steinbacher, Catastrophic Geology, EU 2014. Do you know about that? The dolmens.
I know about the dolmens. I know about plasma geology. I haven't followed so much of his work as I have that of Andy Hall.
Yeah.